Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started as you all filter in. Very warm welcome, everyone, to the 9th annual John D. Greenwald Lecture. We'd like to extend our gratitude to Cassidy Levy-Kent for the firm's support of this lecture in honor of founding partner John Greenwald's remarkable legacy. John Greenwald was a titan of U.S. trade law who never lost sight of the real impacts of trade law and was never afraid to question long-held assumptions. If he could be here today, he would continue to challenge the assumptions behind every policy and keep us moving forward. Later in the session, you'll hear more about John, but allow me now to introduce our 9th Greenwald Lecture honoree, who is very much concentrated on moving us forward in many respects. For this year's Greenwald Lecture, we are pleased to welcome Raj Subramaniam, the President and CEO of FedEx Corporation. Raj started at FedEx as a marketing analyst, and he established himself quickly. Within 5 years, he became Managing Director of Marketing in Hong Kong. He also had a brief turn as a reality TV star on The Big Switcheroo, swapping from his new role as president of FedEx Canada to serve as a frontline courier in front of the cameras. That experience was one among many that showcased Raj's leadership and his focus on FedEx as a people-driven business. Raj is the second ever CEO in FedEx's 55-year history. The business moves more than $2 trillion of commerce every year, with more than 17 million packages a day delivered all around the world. Raj has blazed his own trail in leading the company. His industry experience, leadership, and keen insight have engineered FedEx's success as the company revolutionizes the transportation and logistics industry. Raj is responsible for spearheading the current global transformation of FedEx to pilot it into the future. That includes updating the company's operating strategy, expanding its e-commerce business, and harnessing the power of global supply chain data. So I can think of no one better to share views on this fast-moving landscape today than Raj, and we're privileged to benefit from your time and insights. And here to lead this conversation with Raj, we're pleased to welcome Doug Palmer. Doug has been a prolific reporter for more than 3 decades. He's been on the front lines in Washington and capitals around the world, covering the transformation of U.S. trade law and policy. He's been a senior trade reporter at Politico since 2013. And I know many in the room are close readers of his morning trade newsletter. So Doug is a cutting-edge news source in a fast-changing world. Raj and Doug, we're delighted to welcome both of you for this year's Greenwald Lecture.
Well, thanks very much, Kathleen, for that introduction. Thank you, Raj, for being here today, and thank you, Georgetown, for inviting me to participate at this annual event. I've been in the audience many times. It's changed. I haven't seen the room since it's been renovated. It looks very nice. So just to give everybody an idea of what to expect over the next 30 minutes, I'd like to start off by asking Raj sort of a big picture question, then focus on some specific issues like tariff refunds, geopolitics, the regulatory environment, and then end with a discussion about artificial intelligence and Raj's thoughts on the challenges and the opportunities he sees on the horizon. So let's start with that big picture question. FedEx is a global company with operations in 220 countries and territories, I believe. So obviously has a strong interest in the free flow of goods. But could you kind of give us a quick sketch of your operations, how FedEx supports the global trading system, how important the U.S. market is compared to overseas markets, et cetera?
Well, thank you, Doug, and thank you very much, Professor, for inviting me to be here. It's indeed a great honor to be here today. I think it's a great honor because for me, the opportunity to represent our great company, FedEx. So over the last 53 years, FedEx has spent a lot of time and effort under our founder, Fred Smith, to put together this network. And sometimes people misunderstand the word network, so let me just make sure we get it right. Okay. when you talk about the telephone network, everyone gets it. You pick up the phone, you can receive a phone call, and you can make a phone call to any part of the world. Well, that's the same thing that's true for the physical network, except it's a lot harder to do. And it's taken 53 years to build that out. And so you pick up a package from any one part of the world and get it to any other part of the world, and especially the high value shipments. And that's what we do. And there are only very, very, very few players, only 2 American players who can do that. And so in that, over this period of time, we've expanded in the axis of geography, speed, and weights. And we built this incredible company that's called FedEx. The result of all that is now we move, as was talked about, 17 million packages per day, but most importantly, $2 trillion worth of global commerce, connecting about 3 million shippers to about 225 million consumers. And we are in the center of this ecosystem, moving the high value commerce of the world. Along with that, it generates 2 petabytes of data every single day of the global supply chain. So that's the macro picture of FedEx. 70% of our business today is in the United States, 30% is international. But ultimately, it is a global network, and that's the way you should think about FedEx as a network.
Right. 70% US and 30% international. Do you think it'll always be sort of heavily tilted towards the US more than international?
I think if we look at the next 2 or 3 years, we expect that our international business is actually going to grow faster than domestic. But that's roughly there and thereabouts. We can expect this. Yeah.
Right. Kathleen referred to your recent interview with the New York Times where you talked about your reality show stint, but you also used this, you also said that you thought the world was in a period of re-globalization. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think if you just go back to the history of trade and after the Second World War, global trade represented something like single-digit percentage of the economy. Right. And it steadily grew over a period of time. And I think by the time it got to 2010, it was a quarter of the global economy, the global trade. So that was a pretty inexorable rise in how trade has developed over as percentage of GDP. And after that, it's been essentially plateaued and flattened. So that's kind of the macro perspective on how trade has developed over time. I think a lot of people are talking now about quote unquote de-globalization. I don't see it quite that way.
Okay.
I think ultimately humankind want to trade and travel using now technology that's residing in your pockets with your cell phone, which is essentially an auto entry device in many ways, and physical systems like FedEx, which kind of makes it possible to move orders around the world, customers around the world. So that's in that milieu, as we see now, is that the trade patterns themselves are shifting. I watched this over 35 years, and I have never seen a shift as much as we saw in 2025. I took a snapshot of our data, just end of 2024, and mapped out our origin and destination and said, if there's $100 worth of movement, where did it all go? And did the same exercise for end of 2025. And you can see quite a stark difference. But the trade patterns themselves are changing, doesn't mean it's deglobalized. And so, we have US imports were down, US exports were up. If you look at Latin America, 27 countries in Latin America, the imports were up. Intra-regional trade is up. Just all things are changing. There's no one word to describe it. But I kind of captured the idea with the word re-globalization. That's what I mean is that,
right.
And these patterns are shifting. We're moving from one equilibrium state to another.
Yeah.
And I don't think we're done yet. I think it's going to take another couple, 2, 3 years to get to the next state.
Right. I definitely feel like we're in a period of disequilibrium right now. Things don't seem very settled. Your question kind of anticipated your answer kind of anticipated my next question. which is obviously the global trade landscape has changed a lot over the past few years. I mean, for example, trade flows between the U.S. and China have slowed. Just maybe if you could talk a little bit more about how the company is adapting to this changing landscape.
Well, I think from our perspective, we have three different things that we'll talk about in that respect.
Okay.
One is just go back to my original point about FedEx being a global network. So as trading patterns change, the fact that we have a scaled global physical network actually stands to our advantage. Okay, instead of going from A to B, it's now going from P to Q. But we are in A, B, P, and Q.
Okay.
And we are, we are here, there, and everywhere. And so that is the, that we just need to be one step ahead, and we are, because we see the intelligence from the bottom up. We don't need to rely on market-based data, which is months old. We rely on the data that's, we are essentially a referendum on global supply chains every single day. We get information from the bottom up. Just imagine if a manufacturer wants to move production from one place to another. Well, the first phone call he's going to make is to FedEx. So we would know that information ahead of time. So my first point is that we need to stay nimble and agile about how the patterns are changing and make sure we have enough capacity in these nodes to connect to our hub. We can so just in the last 6 months, we have expanded our hub in Osaka, for example. We expanded capacity in Vietnam. We had a groundbreaking in Navi Mumbai. We opened a facility in Bangalore. We operated new flights into Riyadh. Opened Dublin. We are operating in Chile. This is just some of the examples, and many more things that we have done literally in the last 6 months. But all of this is just connecting in any part of that world to the global network and the globe to that particular part. Adding capacity. So that's the first thing, is that supply chain patterns are evolving, and we are managing and being very agile and resilient about dealing with that. The second thing is the physical actual movement. Our business is to move from one end to another through borders. And just the operational process now has become much more complicated. And ironically, as friction increases, having expertise in that area actually stands you in good stead also. Before, basic algebra would have done. Now you need advanced calculus. We do advanced calculus. And, so that's, operationally how to move goods across borders. Again, FedEx is obviously, that's our job. That's what we do for a living. Suddenly what we do for a living become cool, So that's the second thing. And third is technology. Think about the data that we have. Think about customs clearance. For every commodity, for every country to every other country, for every commodity, we have the clearance information over a period of time. Suddenly, that data, and more importantly, the insights, become valuable in its own right. So we put it all together. Those are the three components of what we are seeing. And again, we are now working with our customers to make their supply chains smarter and more resilient because of the expertise that we have.
Right. Well, there was something you mentioned about, for the first time that you can recall, last year U.S. exports grew while the amount of U.S. imports fell. And I believe you said in previous interviews you'd never seen a year like that. Was that mainly driven by the tariffs that President Trump has imposed, the changes that were made to the de minimis programs, or is there other things going on as well?
Well, the global trading system is going through vast change, so you can't pinpoint any of these to any one thing.
Okay.
But I think I'm just talking about the resultant of all the activities.
Okay.
And so that's when some of those patterns changing. And so, yeah, I mean, the U.S. imports were down and U.S. exports were up. I think that combination thereof, I don't think I've seen it in the recent past.
Right, right. And another thing, just, I was looking up some trade data for this interview. I went to the Customs and Border Protection website to look at shipments under the de minimis program. In fiscal 2024, there were 1.35 billion entries, which I believe was a record. And then in fiscal 25, when President Trump started making changes to the program, they fell to 952 million. So what sort of impact did that have on?
Well, this goes back to my point number 2 I mentioned, because what happens with when the de minimis went away is that the number of packages and shipments that have to be formally cleared through customs goes up. Obviously, right?
Okay,
That's the
right.
point.
So the same number of packages, they just go through different lanes?
Well, yeah, if you look at overall shipments going across the border, that may not change or might change.
Okay.
But definitely the number of shipments that have to be now formally cleared goes up quite dramatically.
Okay.
And so that's the operational element of it. And so we made sure that we invested in a number of people, added a number of people very quickly to make sure our customer experience, is as seamless as it possibly can. And so that's what we did, and to keep the flow moving through the system. And there was a necessary investment to make that happen.
Right. Okay. I want to ask about tariff refunds. FedEx is well known as one of the thousands of companies that's filed a suit at the U.S. Court of International Trade to receive a tariff refund. I mean, you're paying tariffs, I guess, on behalf of your customers, just to some degree. I mean, I'm sure that you pass that charge on to them, but could you explain a little bit about how you see things now in the tariff refund process? I mean, last week we heard from the CBP that they think it's going to take them 45 days to set up, make adjustments to its ACE system. Are you encouraged at this point that FedEx and ultimately your customers are going to get those refunds?
Well, I think the point here is that we are kind of different than a lot of the companies because we are an importer of record.
Okay.
And so we front customs charges to CBP and then collect it from our customers. So we are essentially a pass.
Okay.
And so we just collect from one and go to the other. And so if and when there's a refund, it needs to go back the other way.
Right.
So that's all it is. It's a procedural step.
Okay.
And there's nothing more to it than that. It's just, we are obviously, this is, like I said, we are a pastor. We need, if there is a refund, we collect and give it back to us. Pastor. That's it.
Okay. Are you hopeful on that front? I mean,
Well, we don't know.
Okay.
We'll have to see how that goes. But I think, we had to take this step as a procedural step to make sure that if and when there is a refund.
Right. Okay, it makes sense. Okay. Well, that New York Times interview, I read that you wake up at 4:30 or 5 o'clock every day, and they asked you what was the first app you checked on your phone. You said the news app. Is that like immediately you roll out of bed, you check the news app? Do you have breakfast first or?
No, first thing you got to say is a little prayer.
Okay.
So I definitely check the news of what happened. These days you got to make sure that because we are, a global company and we operate in every corner of the world. This morning I woke up and found out there's a volcano that erupted in Russia. I mean, who would have thought?
Right.
Why is that important? Obviously, that is important because of the flight paths.
Yeah.
And anyway, it's very dynamic. And no, I definitely I find what's happening in the world very quickly when I get up in the morning.
Right.
Maybe after saying a little prayer.
Well, I mean, I kind of wanted you to maybe talk a little bit more about that. I mean, obviously, we're living we've lived through a period of a lot of big geopolitical events. I mean, Russia's war in Ukraine, Israel's war in Gaza, and now the war in Iran. I mean, how does that affect your operations? How do you respond to the sort of?
Well, so first of all, we got to make sure our network is in motion because it is ultimately a network. So, and the team, we got a phenomenal team, and this is where our expertise over a long time matters. And we'll react very quickly and manage the network. In fact, our systems are stable as we speak, our networks are stable as we speak, but it's a very different routing than we would have done 3 weeks ago, for example.
Right.
And but we have to adjust to those circumstances, and we have a phenomenal global team and a control center that manages this, and they do this, better than any other team in the world, I can assure you. And that's, again, I'm very proud of them. I'm proud of our team, our expertise here, and it stands us in very good stead in these kind of circumstances.
You have to adjust routes from time to time. I mean,
You have to adjust the route, but it's like it's got to flow, right?
Yeah.
But you got to look at the whole network and optimize it for the conditions on the ground at that particular moment.
right,
And you can't keep changing it. It's got to be planned for a period of time, so we have all the assets moving
right,
and flowing through the global system. So you got to have a little bit of a plan for the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
right.
And so we get to make those calls and make those adjustments. And the team does a phenomenal job.
Right. And the volcano in Russia, I hadn't heard about that. I mean, so like volcanic ash.
Yeah,
you can't fly through.
Yeah, I'm just so
Okay.
the things that happen every day, and we have, by the way, FedEx is a team of phenomenal meteorologists. And I think, there's a storm going on somewhere in the world, every part of the world, every second. So, we deal with this one of these days you come over, let's give you a tour and you'll see what I mean and actually physically see how this works.
It sounds like kind of a high adrenaline job.
You come to the control center, we'll show you,
Kind of more on the regulatory front. I mean, in recent years, we've seen an increasing number of export controls. Does that pose challenges for FedEx and its customers?
So, and as this is the point I mentioned about when the friction for trading systems increases, ironically, the expertise required for products to move is important. So I'll give you an example. Last year, there was a shipper who was shipping neon signs. Okay, they were under $800, de minimis, no issues. He just Googled up any random HS classification code, put it on it and sent it and cleared, no problem. Because the value was less than $800. Well, the demon was went away. That's no longer true. So he required, I think, something like 200 different classification codes based on the size, the weight, the material, and so on and so forth. And he had no idea, none whatsoever.
Right.
This is a small customer.
Yeah.
So now, because of the intelligence that we have, and because of, by ingesting his product catalog, we were able to predict what HS classification code he might need for a particular shipment with a high degree of probability, and even actually suggest what additional paperwork that he would want to use to make it do that. That's the kind of thing. That's definitely using Gen AI tools based on our data.
Right.
I'm just saying, try to ship this shirt to UK tomorrow and see what happens. How many possible HS classification codes you could use, and which, again, you require deep expertise to actually get the right one. And that's only possible because of the experience and expertise we have. So again, ironically, as the friction increases, your expertise is actually matters. That's what I meant by advanced calculus earlier.
Right. Well, I'm sure your services are more in demand than ever because of that. Well, I mean, you mentioned this term a couple of times, and I've seen it in some other interviews and speeches you're giving. Petabytes, people in the audience probably already knew, but I had to look that up. It's like 1,000 terabytes and a million gigabytes. I hadn't become acquainted with petabytes yet. But so what are you doing with all those petabytes of data?
Well, I think, if you look at the 17 million packages every single day of the world's global supply chain, advanced value, and scanned multiple times, that's the data that we're sitting on. We realized the value of this back in 2020, that this data itself, and especially the insights of the global supply chain, is valuable in its own right. So we'll digress for 1 second here. Before the pandemic, the word supply chain didn't mean much to people. In fact, if I said the word supply chain over here, you'd probably politely escorted me out of the room because nobody would have cared. But, the pandemic changed all that because suddenly even the talk show hosts were talking about supply chain. Again, what we do became cool.
Right.
And so at that point, the conversation went from just-in-time supply chain, oh yeah, we need to get much more resilient, and they went to just-in-case. Well, just-in-case is significantly more expensive, so that translates to higher prices for everybody. To find that balance to make supply chains smarter, you need technology. And that technology starts with data. So I realized back in 2020 that the data itself that we have is valuable in its own right. So we started the process of organizing that data, meaning engineering it, putting it into the right data platform, the global supply chain trading data. And we moved in this direction, actually created a lot of value for our customers even then. And then 2023, the revolution in artificial intelligence takes off. But the fuel for AI is data. And so it was basically AI suddenly superpowers our data that we have.
Right.
And so, fast forward to today, that's what we're now really moving forward with. We have this, think of the operating system of FedEx here and a digital twin. And we are able to now use, again, we are in the early innings, I would call it, and to create, not only improve our own supply chains, optimize our own flows using technology and AI, but optimize our customer supply chains and create value and differentiate, and then use data as our insights as a own value creation engine for us. So we have an opportunity here that we are now working on very furiously.
Well, I just got flashed the 2-minute warning.
Okay.
So let's just wrap up with another sort of big picture question. As you talked about AI and how that's reshaping your industry, but as you look towards the future, where do you see the biggest growth opportunities, and what do you see as the biggest risks on the horizon?
Well, I think first and foremost, I think FedEx is the heartbeat of the industrial economy. And I think as the industrialization of the global markets grows, we are right in the center of it. You can see it whether it's healthcare, whether it is aerospace or defense, or data centers and AI. People talk about billions, in fact, maybe trillions of dollars of investment in data centers and AI. Well, there's a supply chain associated with that, all the way from semiconductor chips and memory to the final production. There's a deep supply chain that's associated with that. We are in the middle of that. So there are a lot of these things, and I look forward in the next 3-4 years that, especially in the industrial economy, and again, even America is getting, as it gets more industrialized, there's a lot of opportunity to move, and we are literally the heartbeat of the industrial economy. And so that's one. The second aspect of it is what we just talked about, is the intelligence that we now have regarding the high-value supply chains around the globe, and how do we make supply chains smarter for everyone, which is our vision. Right. And so I think there's a great opportunity for FedEx to be in the orchestration of global supply chains and to reduce that inefficiency that exists today in the flow of goods, information, and dollars across the global supply chain.
Are there any particular risks you're worried about?
Well, what happens when the geopolitical environment obviously has an impact. So one of the mantras that we have adopted over the last 3, 4, 5 years is focus on the things you can control. Okay. And really intense focus on that, and build resilience to deal with external factors. And again, we've done it quite successfully in the last 3 years. I'm confident that we can do it going forward.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, it's been an honor to host you, Raj. Thank you for giving us a bit of time on your incredibly busy day. Doug, thank you as well for hosting this conversation. Another round of applause, please, for our Greenwald lecture.